Thamesmead has something of a reputation. Of all the planned communities in London, Thamesmead may be the most infamous. Why, though? The dream was a new planned community in southeast London using lands vacated by the Royal Arsenal. This was a largely undeveloped area, the kind of place where you put firing ranges, sewage works and waste processing plants. An industrial wasteland, a blasted marsh with nary a fringe theatre scene or even an artisan bakery. It was to be an entire self-contained town covering about 1,000 acres. Houses, offices, industrial estates, a shopping centre, a health centre, schools, higher education, places of worship, even a marina.
Have we the public house at all?
Oh yes, there's a sizable public house there and another one there.
It would be big, bigger than the City of London, all constructed to the highest standards. The danger of flooding on the former marshland would be mitigated by putting housing above ground level. In the words of the Greater London Council, a town for the 21st century. As with so many housing experiments of the 1960s, there was a philosophy at work. The idea was to create not just a place to live, but a community. High-rise blocks of flats had proven to be a poor solution to the housing problem, badly maintained and havens for muggers. Residents had been decanted from streets their families had occupied for generations into buildings where they knew nobody. They were closed in, lacking in facilities, a place to put people out of sight and out of mind. Thamesmead was to be different. The emphasis would be on low-rise housing built from modern materials. Pedestrians would be separated from busy roads by elevated walkways. Lakes and waterways would create a pleasant, calming feel to the place. There would be more green space per inhabitant than anywhere else in the city. Relatives of already existing tenants were to be given priority on the housing lists. A tenants' association and community office would be set up. You would be encouraged to get to know your locality and your neighbours. In other words, it was to be a place where real people could live actual lives, rather than the naive utopian visions of certain architects I could name, Allison and Peter Smithson. In 1969, the modern designs won the Abercrombie International Architectural Award. How could it possibly go wrong? Well, obviously that's a rhetorical question. If you've never heard of Thamesmead, you might still recognise it from A Clockwork Orange. The title of the film reflects the theme of the story that you cannot impose mechanical order onto something organic like a person. Which is exactly what Thamesmead and other such housing projects invariably tried to do. I don't know if director Stanley Kubrick had this in mind when he chose to film there, but if he didn't, it's an eerie coincidence. The film was released in 1971 when Thamesmead wasn't even fully complete. In fact, many aspects of the design were never completed, to the detriment of the community as a whole. The costs grew out of control. Remember I mentioned a shopping centre? That was never built, leaving the new town with only a few corner shops. Okay, well that's no problem, this is London. Just go into town, right? Well, that brings up another issue. Transport. There would have been a tunnel crossing with a motorway beneath the Thames at Tripcock-Ness, to be dug using a tunnelling machine that would, I assume, acquire the name of the Tripcock-Ness monster. But that never happened. There was to be direct access from Thamesmead to the river. That never happened either. In the 1970s it was proposed to build an underground line here with up to 3 stations, what would become the Jubilee line. That, yes, never happened. The only rail link was Abbey Wood to the southeast. Remember I mentioned the industries, the offices and so forth that were going to make this a proper town? Those never materialised either, and nor did the jobs they would bring. Even the architecture itself became antisocial. The idea was that people would live at first floor level, and on the ground floor you'd have roads and garages. The result was that the estate was vertically bisected. People didn't feel protected, but isolated. The road level felt like a bleak no-man's land, quite unnerving, even by day. The place became a criminal's paradise where all sorts of antisocial behaviour could go unobserved. Fly-tipping, littering and vandalism became commonplace. Junkies and muggers would hide out in stairwells and on walkways. As was so often the case, maintenance was neglected. Let's not let the local authorities of Greenwich and Bexley off the hook here. When the estate was built, potential residents were carefully vetted, which is a little creepy now I come to think of it. But this process was soon abandoned. Local authorities used Thamesmead in the same way that they used so many other estates, as a dumping ground for problem tenants. Let the town planners figure it out. All in all, far from learning from the mistakes of high-density tower blocks, the planners and authorities were repeating them exactly. Later developments abandoned the architectural ideals of the original planners, adopting the more common, whatever approach to new housing that preferred cars to pedestrians. If this was the town of the 21st century, then God help us in the future. Residents began to move out, and empty flats became the target for more destructive behaviour. Gangs patrolled the area, bringing further and more serious crime. The town wound up with less than half of its projected 100,000 inhabitants. Those who couldn't move out often felt trapped and abandoned by the authorities. You can hardly blame them. And for the rest of London, Thamesmead was just some weird town out in the middle of nowhere. Who cares? A Clockwork Orange wouldn't be the only production to take advantage of the state of the estate. Beautiful Thing, MISFITS and The Firm all used the location to represent an urban nightmare. Chris Cunningham filmed the disturbing video to APHEX Twins' Come to Daddy Here. I will eat your soul indeed, Mr. Twin. By the start of the 21st century, the inhabitants had decided enough was enough. A new residents' association was formed. The old concrete buildings would be knocked down and replaced with more modern housing appropriate to the area. Crossrail, it was hoped, would put central London in easy reach, and mugging and vandalism would be replaced with respectable crimes like mortgage fraud. In 2014, most of the area was acquired by the Peabody Housing Association, who put forward a radical scheme. A new shopping centre is to be built. An extension to the DLR has been mooted. A raft of community programmes is being put in place to improve the health and welfare of residents, and, to be fair, there are parts of the estate that look distinctly less bleak these days. Demolition and rebuilding is well underway. But I can't help but feel cautious. After all, what the Peabody people propose is no more than what was promised back in the 60s, and look how that turned out. Do we know any better now? The problem with housing experiments is that by the time you know they've failed, it's too late. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed today's architecturally inconsistent video. If you did, then be a good fellow and hit like and subscribe for more, why not? I'd like to thank my chums over on Ko-fi and Patreon for being the orange to my clockwork. If you'd like to see the extras that they get to see, then follow the links in the description. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.